Mark, if you can hear us, we're here at Roosevelt and 7th Street, where the crowds were blocked off from getting on the freeway. Right now you see police taking down some protesters. It's tough to tell why they chose them in particular. We can hear them yelling, "What did I do?" This is becoming a little more chaotic here. So we've been following a crowd for the last hour and a half. They've moved a couple of miles across downtown, moving into circles, almost a cat and mouse game with police. And police have been in riot gear, moving with them, trying to cut them off at different paths. Their purpose has not always been clear. It's just a mob mentality. So if you look across the street over here, this is part of the crowd. And then again, if you look to my right, you see they've got 3 people face down in custody in the middle of this intersection. Just 10 minutes ago, police pepper sprayed the crowd about a quarter mile north of us and kept them from entering onto the I-10 freeway. Of course, they want to keep them from blocking off the freeway. So people are throwing water bottles. You see backups for police arriving. All of this happening while there's a curfew in place. And unless you have a clear purpose for why you can explain to police you're outside, then you're subject to be taken into custody. We just heard that loud bang was likely a type of flashbang grenade.
Joe,
that actually was a firecracker, I could tell you. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Joe, stand by. We want to go to Team Charles Biancabono, who's also in the middle of another skirmish that's going on. Joe, we'll come back to you in a second. Bianca, where are you and what's happening?
Hey, Mark, we are actually not too far from Joe Dana. We are just north of the intersection of 7th Street and Roosevelt. I can tell you right here, just south of me, you can see several officers in riot gear start to move in on protesters who are now heading east on Roosevelt. And you could actually see some of what looked like fireworks in the air there. And then, of course, you could certainly see the tear gas now. Officers becoming increasingly aggressive here as they're moving in on the protesters. Shortly before you came out to us, protesters who were near the entrance of the 10 on 7th Street started running south on 7th Street saying, let's move to where the police are not. I can also tell you, Roberto, if you want to turn around here, Roberto, you could see an enormous police presence heading down this way. It looks like they're heading west just north of Roosevelt. So they're trying to move in here and gain control of this situation. I'll also note that I'm seeing a lot of graffiti in this area. I saw people that had spray paint cans. So the destruction of property is already beginning tonight. So I'll move around here so we can kind of give you a sense of what's happening. I cannot see many protesters at this point. Most of them ran east on Roosevelt. And again, there were several officers that followed them. And Roberto, if you want to look at this here, now in the intersection of 7th Street and Roosevelt, you can see those officers in riot gear facing east. As I mentioned, that is the direction those We know that rubber bullets were fired last night, and the last thing we'd want to do is get in the way of the police response. And again, here's an officer that's shooting at some of the vehicles that are pulling away. I'm not sure who are in these vehicles, if they're protesters trying to get out of the area or if it's unrelated, but obviously it's past the 8 o'clock curfew, so essentially no one should be out right now. But again, hundreds of protesters ran east on Roosevelt, and that is why you're seeing all of these officers in riot gear facing in that direction, Mark.
Bianca, is it your impression looking at this? You've been out there the last 4 nights, and my initial impression when I saw Joe's report a second ago and now yours is that the attitude of the police department has completely changed. Tonight, they are all business, no backing down, no tolerance. Past 8 o'clock, you are in violation of the curfew, and we are going to arrest you. Is that your observation?
Absolutely. And I will add that an unlawful assembly was declared, adding on to the curfew. So in the past couple of nights, we didn't see officers moving in like this until unlawful assembly was declared. But now, obviously, that we have the curfew, which was enacted by the governor earlier today, they don't have to wait. Again, I should note that that was declared in the past 20 minutes or so. We heard it blasting over the loudspeakers as my crew and I were on our way over to this area, but they didn't have to wait for that to happen because we do have that curfew in place right now. So yeah, certainly seems like a more aggressive approach by officers. They were not wasting any time tonight, Mark.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, Bianca, you've been out there for a few hours now. How did this protest begin this evening? What was the mood? Was it a peaceful protest?
So from what I'm told, we were actually in another area, but from what I'm told, it was very peaceful earlier on. And that seemed to change once the protesters started moving in this direction. After 8 o'clock, things changed completely. A lot of people who were here for the peaceful protest left because they knew that curfew was going to kick in. The ones who are remaining did not seem to care about the curfew. And obviously, they're the ones who are giving problems to the officers in the area. So, you know, it couldn't have been more clear that by 8 o'clock, everyone was asked to be home and inside. Everyone has a right to protest and to express their frustration, which we've seen. But again, most of those peaceful protesters seem to have gone home right around 8 o'clock. So I'm not sure exactly what the intention is of those who remain in the area. Again, they have mostly ran east on Roosevelt. I cannot see any of them in this intersection anymore. And also what you're looking at right now is one of those protesters who is being arrested.
And of course, Bianca, you know, we've been covering
trying to listen
these
in here to
protests
see
the last couple of nights, and Governor Ducey today announcing this statewide curfew in the wake of the damage and some of the violence that has taken place at these protests here over the last couple of nights. So this is a statewide curfew, went into effect at 8 o'clock this evening. It will go until 5 a.m. for the rest of this week. And so what the goal is there is they just don't want people gathering. If you need to go to work past 8 p.m. tonight, you can do that. If you're caring for a loved one, you can do that. If you're going out to get food. But the goal is just to prevent large gatherings like the ones that you see here tonight. It looks like we lost.
That's exactly right, Caribe. And again, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
go ahead,
we
Bianca.
lost your picture for a moment, but you're back up now.
Okay, and exactly. So what I was saying was that was certainly not to stop these groups from protesting, from demonstrating. That's been encouraged. But it's to prevent some of the violence and the destruction that unfortunately we have seen all across the valley over the past couple of nights. So again, I'm not sure if most of those protesters have gone home or if they've just relocated. What we've been hearing from our other crews who are around the area, Joe Dana and our digital producer Cam as well, is that as soon as these protest groups after 8 o'clock would run into a large police presence, they would simply turn around and just start going in the opposite direction. It seems that that's what they were trying to do right before you came out to us, but the police moved in and stopped them. They couldn't get away quick enough. So, of course, you saw a couple of them getting arrested. We are actually still seeing another protester who looks like she's in handcuffs on the curb here at 7th Street and Roosevelt, right outside of Jimmy John's, for whoever is familiar with the area. And I'd imagine that this is going to continue to happen tonight if these protesters don't go home.
Right, and Bianca, Mark is right. You know, it's only, what, 9 something right now? It's about 9:08. And we're already seeing several people being arrested as opposed to the last couple of nights It was hours, well into the midnight hours before we saw anybody being arrested. So you can definitely tell that the police are more aggressive and just taking a totally different approach tonight compared to the protests of the last few nights.
No question about it. To put things into perspective, on Friday night, the arrest that I witnessed was probably around 1 o'clock in the morning. Last night, we know that police made at least 100 arrests, if not more, and that was also around the 1 or 2 o'clock hour. So yeah, we're talking hours earlier tonight in comparison to the past couple of nights.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that, part of this, and I want to get your impression on this, Bianca, because you've been out there, boots on the ground, for the last 4 nights, is to send a statement on the part of not only Phoenix Police Chief Jerry Williams, but now that the governor has declared a curfew, it's that, look, protest until 8 o'clock, but after 8 o'clock, things are not going to be pretty for you if you're caught out. And so do you sense that this is also trying to send a statement for nights to come to people that would stay out past 8 o'clock?
Absolutely. I would certainly think so. And it goes back to what I was saying before. Demonstrations are encouraged right now. People are angry, they are upset, they're sad, and they need to speak out. That's how they're expressing their emotions right now. But there's a proper way to do so. And we certainly saw that earlier on today, downtown Phoenix, when you saw over 1,000 peaceful protesters speaking, chanting, just like what we saw last night around 7 o'clock, guys. But things have changed. And, I will note that we've noticed that typically it's after 10 o'clock or 10:30 where the mood tends to change. Now that curfew has been enacted and it started at 8 o'clock, it seems that 8 o'clock is the new 10 or 10:30.
Bianca,
And
stand by just a second.
Yep.
Stand by just a second. We want to quickly go to Joe Dana, who's just down the block from you. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a bunch of police now moving to the south of us where we believe part of this mob has headed. I will tell you, following this crowd for the last 3 hours, this is a movement that doesn't know what it wants. They began early, peaceful, chanting in unison, doing their thing. After 7:30, the crowd started to disperse. Others joined in. As they were marching, they started to damage a bank. They damaged a Jimmy John's across the street here we see, smashed in the windows. Some of the protesters were yelling, "This is supposed to be peaceful. This is supposed to be peaceful." Others were here just to cause trouble. You had a couple here with Antifa flags as well, with their own agenda. Okay? So you have fragmented groups here who are here for now. Once dark hits, they're here for different reasons. They're trying to stay together. A couple of these leaders have megaphones, and they're yelling for everyone to stay unified, stay together as they continue to march. The bottom line is, a lot of them want to do damage. They want the confrontations with police, as far as we can tell. But there's still a lot of other protesters in that group that we saw earlier today who simply want to keep marching, but they don't want the violence. And we're going to now go try to find this crowd as they move further south. The concern, number one, is obviously that innocent bystanders get in the way and get hurt, especially as police emerge onto these crowds. They're using the pepper, they're using the smoke grenades, etc. Secondly,
All right,
of course, you're worried about the damage.
Okay. All right, Joe, thank you so much. We're going to check back in with you coming up here in just a little bit. But now we want to head out to Tempe. That is where our Team 12's Rachel Cole is standing by. Rachel, where are you? Kind of set the scene for us.
Yeah, good evening, Mark and Caribe. I hope you guys can hear me all right. We're out here at Baseline near Priest outside of Arizona Mills. Tempe PD has set up a perimeter. They did that very early on in the day to avoid having crowds approach the mall. So far, it is effective. There haven't been any crowds out here, but you can see the police presence around the mall just over my shoulder. Again, police have been out here for several hours. We've also seen DPS troopers making their way around the mall. You can kind of make a nice circle. We've also seen people yelling and doing that in cars, a lot of familiar vehicles circling the mall. I'm not sure what the attempts will be, as we're not sure what the plans of the protesters are at this point. but we do know that Tempe PD is in place with a perimeter, and they are hoping that anything that happens around the Tempe area, again, Baseline and Priest, that it will remain peaceful. We've seen a couple of crowds walking, but more or less keeping to themselves. So we'll be sure to let you guys know if anything changes. But again, a perimeter around the entire Arizona Mills Mall with Tempe PD and DPS troopers in tow. So everything is calm at this hour.
And Rachel, you know, we've had reports of police departments doing that very same thing, setting perimeters around other malls in other parts of the valley. And you were in Scottsdale yesterday. So is this in direct response to what happened at Scottsdale Fashion Square Mall yesterday?
So we can only assume that a lot of police departments are trying to learn from the 3 previous nights of protests, that they are trying to take as many precautionary steps as they can and to try to get out ahead of these things. So I believe that this is Tempe's response to the damage and destruction that Scottsdale PD saw last night, as they did call in reinforcements from Chandler, Mesa, DPS, SWAT. We saw all those agencies out there, as well as Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. So I do think that with DPS out here especially, Tempe is trying to be as precautionary as they can and try to keep things as peaceful as possible, because as we all know, the statewide curfew, 8 o'clock, has already gone into effect. And while there are people out and about walking around, hopefully they will get the message to just go ahead and go home and sit this one out, because police are ready and willing to cite anybody who is in violation of that curfew.
You know, Rachel, a lot of malls were actually closed today. Scottsdale Fashion Square, for obvious reasons, it was looted and destroyed last night. But other malls were closed out of precaution. For example, Chandler Fashion Square was closed today. Any word if Arizona Mills was open for business earlier? And those that, and by the way, those that were open, a lot of them closed earlier than normal.
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head. And typically malls close earlier on Sundays anyways. And then, of course, coronavirus added new hours of operation for many stores, even the mall as a whole. So as far as the mall being open earlier in the day, I do need to check on that. But as far as we know, it did have hours adjusted. So I can only assume that they were taking more precautions. But we need to go ahead and verify that with Arizona Mills Mall. We've tried to reach out to them, and I have not heard back yet, but we will continue to do that throughout the night as we follow Twitter chains and much more as situations continue to develop throughout the night.
Okay, Team 12's Rachel Cole for us out at Arizona Mills Mall in Tempe. Tempe police having put a good blockade around there. I want to show you some video from earlier, and this was when we came on the air at the top of the hour. This is a takedown by Phoenix police at about 9 o'clock of protesters as things started to get out of hand. As Joe mentioned, there is a decided difference tonight in the attitude of police. There is now a curfew in place as of 8 o'clock. They issued an order saying that they were officially in violation. As of the governor's declaration of curfew, they declared it an unlawful assembly, and then police moved in and quickly started taking people down and arresting them. And maybe as much as anything, as much as getting these people off the streets, it's to send a message that your presence on the streets, even though protesting peacefully is encouraged, it is encouraged up until 8 o'clock, and after that, it is no longer encouraged.
Right. And, you know, Bianca did point out, who's been covering these protests the last few nights, that tonight police action is a lot more aggressive, a lot earlier on. In the past few nights, we didn't see arrests happening well after midnight, but tonight it is very different. We're at the 9 o'clock hour, just a little bit past it, and we've already seen several people arrested. In fact, yesterday's protests in downtown Phoenix, 114 people were arrested, and in Scottsdale, where we saw the looting there at Fashion Square Mall, 12 people were arrested in Scottsdale. So just based on what we're seeing right now in central Phoenix, it looks like it's possible those numbers could be a little bit higher as we wake up to things on Monday. Right now, you're looking at live video here. This is from 7th and Roosevelt. And you can see there that police have blocked off the intersection there. You see multiple agencies that have responded to this. Again, Governor Doug Ducey saying that National Guard mobilization will be expanded. So tonight, wherever there are protests, there are multiple agencies, multiple law enforcement agencies and resources being deployed to those areas to make sure that the damage and the vandalization we've seen over the past few days does not happen again. And again, with this curfew, you can be fined up to $2,500 and possibly 6 months in jail if you are caught outside of this, or spending time outside beyond the curfew. The curfew went into effect at 8 p.m. and goes until 5 in the morning, and that will be for the next few days.
Well, here's the thing. If you want to go out and protest, you can protest. Think about this. The curfew ends at 5 a.m. So conceivably, you can go out at 5:30 in the morning with your friends and protest until 8 o'clock at night. Now, if that isn't enough time to get your point across, then I don't know how much more you need. And after 8 o'clock, I think the statement here by Phoenix PD and the response that we're seeing in other cities like Tempe, where Rachel Cole just was, is look, protest. That's the American way. Yeah. That's your right. We encourage it. But do it peacefully. And after 8 o'clock, at least for the next week, we're not going to have this. Right. We're not going to have a repeat of what we saw last night at Scottsdale Fashion Square, where people are looting and destroying private property and scaring innocent people. And by the way, just to fill in the blanks a little bit, today we have seen another day of violence for the fourth day. Santa Monica, California, absolutely a war zone today. The state of Washington, the Seattle area, absolutely a war zone today. Washington, D.C., we saw fires burning. It was surreal. Fires burning outside of the White House. These are troubled times that we are living in, and it's coming on the heels of the coronavirus.
Yes.
And I think that from a law enforcement standpoint, tempers are wearing thin.
Sure, and we've spoken to a number of law enforcement experts here over the last couple of nights, and they've all kind of spoke to an escalation in some of the violence happening earlier on. Typically a normal kind of cadence for these protests is it starts off pretty peaceful in the daytime, and then as the sun goes down, the nighttime hours wear on, then you get those people who start to get a little bit more rowdy, and then eventually it leads to violence, usually at night. But what we've been seeing is the complete opposite. During the daylight hours, things are already starting to get very chaotic, very unruly, lots of damage already happening. And so I think our governor taking that into account, looking at the past few nights and how as the night wears on, as the hours get later and later, things seem to get more chaotic. And so, like you said, Mark, cutting it off at 8 o'clock. And we saw a great protest today in downtown Phoenix. There were 1,000 people there, more or less. I even saw some kids and singing and chanting and people speaking, and certainly they had a way to express their frustrations. They had a way to, just kind of release some of the sadness and the anger that they're feeling about some of the recent events. George Floyd, being killed, and just, police brutality against minorities across our country in general. So that has been allowed to happen. But now we're beyond that 8 o'clock hour where police are now saying, we don't want you out there.
And I want to point out also, because I think it's important, not only are tempers wearing thin with police, but tempers are wearing thin with the general public. And certainly for years and years and years, hundreds of years, tempers, rightly so, should be worn thin with the African American community. Years of abuse, years of neglect, years of not hearing their cries.
Right.
But protest, to be effective, has to resonate with the masses. And certainly, looting and violence will not resonate and bring about the change which needs to happen.
True, and we like I said, we've been speaking with law enforcement agencies, and they too, they're advocates of protests.
Absolutely,
they believe in it. They know it's important. They like to give allow the public to be able to do that. But I think some of the stuff we've been seeing now, we're starting to see innocent people potentially getting kind of caught up in some of this violence as these protesters take to the streets, and, you know, private property getting caught up now. And so that's where it just becomes a concern for them. And that's why, you know, each night we've seen these unlawful assemblies being declared by police. And they say it's when when protesters cross that line, when they go from being lawful and peaceful to now making criminal acts, so throwing bottles at, you know, police officers and, you know, firecrackers and some of the other things that we've already actually seen in tonight's live shot. We saw a bunch of protesters throwing bottles at police officers
as they were arresting
people. People. And, you know, you've seen the video there. Tear gas has already been deployed in some cases, some of the rubber bullets. Again, police just being a little bit more aggressive tonight than they have in the past few nights.
Well, it's like I've always told my kids, and when your girls get older, you'll tell them the same thing, and that is nothing good ever happens after midnight.
Yeah.
Now, in this case, nothing good happens after 8 o'clock.
So,
I think that with the added presence of the National Guard now, there will be more. I think that emboldens Phoenix PD,
yes,
Scottsdale PD, Tempe PD, and all the agencies that we see, because now they have backup. Now they have muscle with them, and I think that they will attempt to really restore any of the law and order that was lost over the last few nights. Will quickly try to be restored, and to, as we said earlier, send a message that protest. It is your right.
Yes.
It is encouraged.
It's encouraged,
but
yes.
do it lawfully.
And do it
the
before
right
8
way.
o'clock.
And do it before 8. Get it done before 8 o'clock.
Right, right. So again, we're just kind of looping this video for you of officers taking several people down to the ground right there in the middle of the intersection, arresting them, getting ready to load them up into cruisers. But you can still see just kind of how fragmented these groups are.
These are the people that are just itching for a confrontation.
Right.
And police aren't going to take it anymore. Caribe, I want to just redirect our broadcast right now and our coverage to Scottsdale, which was the scene of just pure ugliness last night. Team 12's Mitch Carr was right in the middle of it in Old Town Scottsdale, not far away from Scottsdale Fashion Square, where dozens of stores were looted and robbed and destroyed. Mitch, what do you have?
Mark and Caribe, I know that it's a little bit earlier than things popped off last night, but if there's one area that's in compliance with the governor's emergency declaration right now, Scottsdale, right in the Scottsdale quarter where the corner of
Media,
73rd, and it's quiet as can be around here. And this is
nice try, Roberto.
Around 8 o'clock. There are a ton of cop cars around here. We have just seen Scottsdale police, the police car. They're just circling the Scottsdale quarter right now. And off to my right over here,
we have to get
National Guard units that are stationed, and there are also fire trucks from Scottsdale that are making their way around. So they are really prepared after what happened.
Okay, Mitch, I think we're having some problems with your audio. We're hearing a couple of other reporters on top of you, and we'll get that cleaned up and come back to you, because a lot of people have focused and concentrated on what happened at Scottsdale last night, the cleanup efforts today. Actually, if you were with 12 News earlier today, a tremendous scene, and that was people, not store owners, but people who lived in the area, people who saw what happened last night coming out to help in the cleanup. Returning merchandise that was dropped on the street in looters' haste to leave to avoid arrest last night. Right. They were dropping merchandise that had been stolen, returning that. And it was black and white together, working side by side in the cleanup efforts, in the efforts to return merchandise to these store merchants. And I think the vast majority, 99%, of the people that live in this area are that way. And it doesn't mean that they condone what happened to George Floyd, but it means that there's a right way to do it,
yes,
and there's a wrong way to do it.
Absolutely. All right, let's head out now to Bianca Bono. She is somewhere nearby where some of that activity has been happening. She's moved, though. Bianca, where are you now?
Hey guys, yeah, so the situation has changed quite a bit in the past 10 minutes. So last time we checked in with you, we were at 7th Street and Roosevelt near the 10. That's when a lot of tear gas was deployed and the protesters or demonstrators just scattered and started running east. So where we are right now, we're at Fillmore and 9th Street. We just had a conversation with the Phoenix police officers who you could see here in riot gear. They told us that essentially there isn't necessarily a strong core group of protesters at this point. Everyone has run in this direction and is kind of hiding in the dark. They have advised us to stay on the sidewalk, and they said if we want to go east to try to find where some of these protesters are at this point, they recommend we get in our cars because the police officers and law enforcement have kind of scattered throughout all of these neighborhoods, and they're just walking up and down, trying to find the protesters who are allegedly hiding in the dark right now. So we're kind of at a standstill here. We certainly, again, don't want to get in the crossfires. We don't want to get in their way. So they've asked us to stay on the sidewalk. That is absolutely what we plan to do. So we're going to try to navigate, maybe go around the perimeter here
Bianca,
to see if potentially those protesters link up again.
Okay, Bianca, stand by. We want to go back to Joe Dana. There are some people being arrested where Joe is right now. Joe, where are you?
We're at 13th Street in Polk, which is further east from where Bianca is, and several protesters just started scattering into neighborhoods. We don't know the exact reason why they're in custody right now, but you see 6 or 7 here on the curb as police are offering them water. I'm going to just ask one of them here right now. Excuse me, can you tell me why you came out tonight?
Black Lives Matter, man. No justice, no peace.
What happened? Why did you get taken into custody?
Oh, I got left behind. No, I'm good. I got left behind, short of breath, running from the cops all the time, prosecuting us.
Is it worth it? Well, the problem is, though, because there's a curfew in place, police don't see this as peaceful anymore because they're asking everyone to now be inside. Is it worth it to be now arrested?
Worth it.
Why?
It's just worth it.
All right, and if you see, we have a couple of more individuals in custody here. Police are asking us now to give them space, so we're going to give them space. But, you know, what happens is you get dozens running at the same time, and basically police catch up with who they can catch up with and take them down and put them in custody like you see here.
And Joe,
if I turn the camera to the left here, you got some people standing out in their yard. If you can imagine, if you're just sitting at home and then all of a sudden 5 or 10 police vehicles show up, and people are running through your yard, and cops are tackling people where they can to take them into custody. That's what a lot of these people walked out of their houses to see right now. So,
and Joe, you
have it. These people in custody. This is, again, just a dark little quiet neighborhood that is probably a quarter mile from where Bianca was, about a half mile from where we saw that confrontation earlier at 7th Street and Roosevelt. Where protesters clashed with police near the I-10. They likely were trying to get onto the I-10 and hold up freeway traffic. That was clearly a priority for officers, not to allow them to get on the freeway. That was the first time we saw the deployment of the flashbang grenades and the pepper spray canisters, etc. So now this group, and they've broken up. Several of these people have now moved into these neighborhoods, and that's the result. You see a couple of them laughing, smiling over there, so not too much in distress, but possibly for others they're weighing the fact that they may have to be taken into custody and possibly booked tonight.
Joe,
so,
any idea what they'll be charged with? Is it unlawful
we also
assembly?
understand police are combing this area because they suspect some of the protesters may have actually tried to jump into backyards and hide. And so we want to keep our distance in case any other confrontations take place. We want to keep a safe distance, let police do their job, but also be as transparent as we can here to show you what's happening as it's playing out, show you police doing their job. And if I turn the attention over here, you see some officers now walking at the direction of a homeowner where they believe someone else may be hiding. Above us, a helicopter continues to shine lights on where the main portion of the crowd is. So we believe they are to our north. And so that's the situation. Several things happening at once here, Mark and Caribe.
Yeah.
Joe, can you hear us? Can you hear us, Joe? I don't think he can hear us. No, he can't.
All right, that's Team 12's Joe Dana. You can see just handfuls of people being arrested here and there. Let's go to Sky 12 right now. Sky 12 is over Scottsdale Quarter right now, and let's see what the scene looks like there. You can see police on horseback, and Caribe, a much different scene than we saw last night when we saw roving gangs of looters moving store to store, some on the Mercedes dealership on the east side of Scottsdale Road, some on the west side of Scottsdale Road where the Apple store was, and tonight it is absolutely a ghost town there.
It is a ghost town, you know, for a couple of reasons. One that you mentioned earlier, that, you know, obviously Scottsdale Quarter Mall didn't even open today. It was closed because of all that damage. So, you know, in general, it would have been a much more quiet scene. But also today, you can see from law enforcement, the approach is entirely different. You know, last night.
Yeah, we didn't see any armored vehicles parked in parking spaces outside of Scottsdale Fashion Square.
We sure didn't.
And you wonder, because this was known since about 5 o'clock last night, that protesters / looters were thinking of going at Scottsdale Fashion Square in that area. Had we seen this kind of presence last night, if what happened would have happened?
Exactly. More than likely not. And that was the question that we, you know, kept asking while we were on the air, because we had clear shots of looters damaging, stealing things from buildings, but we almost essentially saw very little, if any, law enforcement in that area last night at Scottsdale Fashion Square Mall. So tonight is obviously a much different scene, as Mitch told us a little bit earlier, that, you know, there are law enforcement officers that have set up sort of a perimeter there. Entrances in and around the mall have been shut off, not allowing people to come in that area. So again, pretty big deterrent tonight. In addition to the fact that we are under a curfew. This is a statewide curfew that Governor Doug Ducey put into place in response to some of the damage and the violence of protests here over the past couple of nights. So not to stop the protesters. Protesting is encouraged. It is just that after that 8 o'clock hour, you know, they want to try to minimize some of these protests and some of those outliers from committing acts of violence and crime. So let's go now to Mitch Carr. He is in Scottsdale. Not sure exactly where you're set up, Mitch, but where are you and what are you seeing?
Mark and Caribe, we are right on Butte Terrace right now, and we were at 73rd Street. We moved a little bit closer to Scottsdale Road. This is Scottsdale Road behind us, but we're outside of Scottsdale Quarter. This is a big shopping center, and there is a heavy police presence here. I know we've been looking at it from the air. So what we're seeing right now is that every entrance or exit to Scottsdale Quarter is completely shut down. In fact, we moved in order to have a little bit more happening behind us to show you where the police cars were. And they approached us. You've got mounted units with police officers on horses. You've got lots of units that are driving around. And I believe you already showed through Sky 12 that there are some National Guard Humvees that are just down the street from us as well. I got to say, if there is one place that's in compliance with what the governor asked and well protected tonight, out of what we've seen, it is definitely this place, because as of 8 o'clock when the curfew went into effect, there was nothing going on. We saw one traffic stop, and they probably just asked the guy to go home because they let him go pretty quickly. That's it. We've just seen Scottsdale police cars that have been driving around. We've seen the fire department driving around. And we've seen lots of flashing lights, but nobody has tried to come up to this place. This is a very different scene than what we saw at Fashion Square last night, and what I saw with my own eyes at Fifth Avenue and Scottsdale Road last night. That was a very active scene with lots of demonstrators, lots of looters. There was some interactions between business owners that had armed themselves to protect their own businesses. That is certainly not the case tonight. I know the Scottsdale police were aimed at being a lot more prepared for a larger presence than they were last night. They told us at the press conference earlier today they were expecting 53 people to show up total last night outside of the Dick's Sporting Goods, and they ended up with 500 people. And so this situation is they're going to be ready for 500 people. And if 50 people or less show up, then that's a good thing. And that's the situation right now, is that they are completely prepared. This place is totally locked down. There is no one in or out. It's pretty much just us and law enforcement at this point.
Hey, Mitch, what do you know about last night in terms of arrests and the number of businesses that were damaged and possibly the amount of loss of property?
The Scottsdale police didn't get into the number of businesses or the loss of property specifically, but they did tell us they arrested 12 people. And I tweeted that and got a lot of heat on Twitter about, oh my gosh, 12 whole people. But what they said is that the investigation is ongoing. They've got surveillance video. They've got lots of video from a lot of different sources. And in fact, a lot of the people that were doing the looting, in fact, were videoing themselves. I know that Jake Paul, he's a YouTube star. He identified himself as being one person that was there, said he was just there to document. But as these people who have identified themselves and posted video themselves on the internet have posted it, Scottsdale police says the investigation is ongoing. So 12 people might turn into 24 tomorrow. It might turn into a lot more in the future. But right now that arrest number stands at 12, and the number, the amount of damage that's been done and the number of stores that have been damaged, that's unknown at this point.
Mitch, was there any sort of attitude of mea culpa today on the part of Scottsdale police where they took some responsibility for a lack of presence and a lack of response at Scottsdale Fashion Square?
There was, and that's something I haven't seen a lot in my 11 years as a news reporter. I haven't seen a lot of police officers saying, "Hey, we got it wrong last night." But Chief Rodbell came out and said, "I know we let some people down last night," and he said that they're not going to let it happen tonight. And he also said that they just basically were prepared for 50-some people last night and ended up with 500. And at that point, they moved from a direct confrontation strategy to a containment strategy. So the reason, according to them, that you saw protesters by the dozens able to break into the Apple store and then later into the Mercedes-Benz dealership at the corner of Camelback and Scottsdale Road is because they said that they needed to contain those people in a central area. And that central area was right around Fashion Square. They actually told us that Fashion Square, with its big footprint, was too large to put officers around, that they would have needed about 500 officers just to cordon off Fashion Square, and that would have left them in a tough position in order to cover some of the places where the rioters eventually made it to after they looted Fashion Square. So what he was saying was we didn't have enough people. It took a couple of hours to get other jurisdictions and people from other places in. Those include Chandler and Mesa, the Department of Public Safety. And he said it took a while to get everybody in, get them coordinated, and that by about midnight or 12:30, they had everything pretty much controlled, and they were able to move with the numbers that they have away from containment to actually direct confrontation. And we did see that. We saw a number of direct confrontations, but they happened later at night. Of course, their first contact with those rioters last night was about 9:30. And again, they were expecting 53 people and ended up with 500. So at that point, they had to sit back and watch them loot. And they said their priority was to keep people away from residential areas. And then speaking of residential areas, tonight, there was a social media threat from various accounts about going into Scottsdale residential areas. And the Scottsdale police just tweeted about 15 or 20 minutes ago. I'm going to see if I can bring this up right now. They said that they are aware of rumors, aware of a widely dispersed message referencing targeted attacks on Scottsdale residences and women specifically in our community. At this time, that message is unsubstantiated. If you see something suspicious, dial 911. So what the chief said, what Chief Rodbell said earlier today was that they pivoted from trying to directly confront about 50 people to trying to keep 500 people in a business area and away from residences to protect Scottsdale residents. And then once they had the numbers, they were able to directly confront those rioters. And so tonight, as it pertains to residences, they say there is a social media threat, but it's unsubstantiated. So they should be safe, and they're continuing to protect these commercial areas right here, like at Scottsdale Quarter.
Hey, Mitch, were you able to speak to any of those businesses, Mercedes-Benz, any of those business owners in that area or their managers today about what happened to their stores?
I spoke to one last night, and it was the owner of the jewelry store, and they had seen what happened to the Apple store earlier in the night. So he called his family and friends and said, bring your guns. He said, we don't have enough police here. We got to protect ourselves. So they ended up holding themselves up inside this jewelry store and ended up having a direct confrontation with the protesters. There were 6 or 7 people with rifles, a few people with handguns, and they were just standing in the jewelry store. And they said, if anybody comes into this building, then that's when we'll engage. Nobody did end up entering that building, and police did show up to stop those protesters from going any further. And then eventually they were dispersed. As far as today, I did speak to the manager of a European high-end furniture retailer. It was right there on Scottsdale Road across the street from Fashion Square, and her name was Hatuma Sissoko. She was the manager of this I can't remember the name of it. It's got a French name, and it was confusing to me, so I apologize for that. But she was the manager of that showroom, and the place was completely trashed. And she is an African-American woman, and she was sitting there saying, in the name of racial justice, we're destroying this. And she said it didn't make any sense to her. And so you have a lot of people in Scottsdale, especially in that area of Scottsdale and Old Town, that are going back to their businesses, and they're just seeing sort of their life's work, depending on who's working there, in pieces as a result of who knows what. Chief Rodbell said today, these people were not here to protest. They were not here to demonstrate. They were here to riot, and they were here to agitate, and they were here to destroy things, and that's exactly what they did. And so you had some of those business owners just trying to come to terms with the idea that they were not necessarily targeted, but that they were the victims of completely random violence and completely random anger that they had nothing to do with. And they were pretty incredulous and obviously pretty upset about that.
Understand. And Mitch, we also understand the presence of the National Guard. What effect, if any, are you seeing there of a National Guard presence tonight?
The only thing we've seen from National Guard is there are 3 Humvees right down the street from us, and they seem to be parked in a staging area. They're just hanging out waiting for something to happen. I haven't seen National Guard vehicles rolling around here. Just trying to see what that was. And so as far as the National Guard goes, it seems like they are ready in reserve, but they haven't come out yet. And Chief Rodbell did say that they will be back up tonight, that they are not here to necessarily be on the front lines. They are almost backfilled. For example, what we saw last night at the corner of, I believe it was Camelback and Scottsdale Road, what we saw was a line of officers, and they were Scottsdale police officers. And then at a certain point, it's very hot. They've been standing for a long time in full riot gear. Eventually, they were replaced by DPS. And I think that's the role that the National Guard is going to play tonight. If things don't get any crazier, if things don't become like they were last night, National Guard will relieve those officers that are currently on the front lines.
All right, Mitch. We'll check back in with you in just a little bit. Let's head back over to Joe Dana, where last time we checked in, there were several people that were being arrested. Joe, what's the scene out there now?
If you look behind me, there's several officers that had surrounded this abandoned house. So they were making sure there weren't any stragglers, perhaps hiding inside the house. We saw earlier 6 or 7 protesters taken into custody relatively easily for police in terms of they didn't put up a fight necessarily. But if you have others who don't want to go quietly, then that poses a whole new level of potential danger. And so police were being very cautious. They had surrounded this particular abandoned house. They thought there might be someone inside, but it looks like they've just cleared it. They've all left the property now. So we still have a group of people who were arrested sitting on a sidewalk over there.
Yes.
To our north, we have a helicopter continuing to focus on an area where they believe there are other demonstrators or rioters. So we're going to try to follow them and see what else is happening to the north of us. But it looks like this situation here de-escalated and it ended quietly.
Joe, can you hear us by chance?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. A little bit earlier, you
Yes.
were talking about the distinction between the different motivations of groups within the protest. You said largely it was very peaceful,
right.
and those who were there to fight for injustice and honor, those who have been killed at the hands of police. Like they left at about 8 o'clock when that curfew went into effect. And then you spoke about some of these other groups. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit more?
Well, sure. You had some people leave after the 7:30 protest. I mean, and this is a protest that ended with a pastor giving a prayer, and everyone kneeling, bowing heads, and ending with a prayer. And then many people left, right? But then you had the crowd still sticking around, and then they had decided they were going to start moving. And once 8 o'clock hit, the stakes are raised because the curfew's in order, right? So they gradually moved to the north and the east, several blocks, 10, 20 blocks. And police sort of trying to keep up with them every step of the way, blocking them off at certain points. And as they moved, we saw others drive up and jump out of their cars and jump into the crowd. None of them had signs with them. These are people who clearly just want to join in the mob. Whether they want to cause destruction, we can't tell. But the point is, you had someone with an Antifa flag. You had someone else with a sign that said, suggesting this was a peaceful protest. You had some yelling that this should remain peaceful while they were marching. They didn't want the destruction that we saw. They didn't want the broken windows. So you have different factions within this group. Back to you.
All right. Joe Dana live for us. Let's go to Team 12's Bianca Bono as we continue our coverage of people still out protesting, now going almost 2 hours past the curfew that was installed by Governor Doug Ducey. Bianca?
Yep, that's exactly right, Mark. And right now we are at Fillmore and 9th Street, where, again, Phoenix Police has asked us to kind of hang tight because, in their words, the situation is not under control. And they said it would not be safe for us to head south, which is where we see several police vehicles down towards Taylor. I can tell you that over the past 10, 15 minutes or so, we saw at least half a dozen people right in front of us get arrested. And what we're hearing is that there's some sort of prisoner transport vehicle that they might be waiting for, either a bus or a van or something like that, that will likely take all of these people away from the scene. We've been seeing several either protesters or people who were just out past curfew get put in handcuffs, and many of them were taken south on 9th Street, again, I would imagine, towards those vehicles that are lit up down at the end of the street. We also heard there's likely another large group of people detained towards Taylor. But again, we have been told that it's not yet safe or clear for media to walk south on this street because they're trying to kind of block off the neighborhood. Again, we've been told by police who are standing right here next to us that there isn't necessarily a large group of protesters anymore, that everyone is scattered and is kind of hiding out in this neighborhood, very similar to what Joe is seeing. He's just a few blocks east of me. So it looks like they're still kind of combing through these neighborhoods. We also did see one gentleman who lives right down the street from here. He said he hasn't been able to get back. He had to show his ID to prove that he does, in fact, live right down the street. And that's the reason that he is out, because he can't get to where he lives. I'll also tell you that as members of the media, we were ID'd to ensure, that we have a valid reason to be out past curfew, which, in case those at home do not know, members of the media are an exception to this curfew. We're allowed to be out here if we are reporting, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. So we're going to try to potentially go around here so we can head south, because we're seeing a lot of police vehicles again in the area of 9th Street and Taylor, even maybe beyond towards Van Buren. So we'll send it back to you guys for now, and we're going to head down that way to check out what's happening there.
All right, Team 12's Bianca Bono with us on another night of protests in the Valley. Things seem to be possibly slowing down for now. A much tougher, much more visible police presence in Phoenix. In Scottsdale, where Mitch Carr is reporting, we have seen very little activity, if at all, if any. But earlier this evening, about 9 o'clock, you're looking at some videotape at the corner of 7th Street and Roosevelt, where police were quick to move in and begin arresting people who defied the orders to disperse after this was called an unlawful assembly. That was declared at about 8:14, 14 minutes after the curfew went into effect. These people, about 45 minutes later, were arrested by Phoenix police, and we've seen scenes like this across downtown Phoenix, where Phoenix police, after the fourth night of this, are not taking any guff from these protesters who want to engage.
Yeah, that's right. And, this is in response to damage and vandalism that has been done not only in downtown Phoenix the past couple of nights, with the Sandra Day O'Connor courthouse being damaged, the windows being busted out there on the first floor, damage to a Chase Bank. Multiple locations around downtown Phoenix over the past couple of nights. And then, of course, what we've been showing you that happened in Scottsdale at Fashion Square Mall. So this is in response. The curfew is in response to that, not to dissuade people from protesting. That certainly is allowed, but They don't want to see the type of damage and vandalism that has happened over the past couple of nights as the nighttime hours wear on. So this is going to continue throughout the week. This curfew is expected to last each night. It goes into effect every night at 8 p.m. and expires at 5 o'clock in the morning. So outside of that time frame, protesters are certainly encouraged to come and raise their voices and support their cause. Again, you're looking at some earlier video that we showed you of some of these groups that have kind of broken off from the main peaceful protest that started earlier this evening before the curfew went into effect. As some of our reporters have said, largely those protesters have gone home. They have left home for the night ahead of this curfew. And then, of course, you had some groups that later kind of added on and then seemed to be, obviously they're provoking police by throwing water bottles and getting into these altercations with police officers and ultimately getting arrested.
And part of this, again, is let's see what we can get away with. Let's see how far we can push police. There was an 8 o'clock curfew. Let's see if at 9 o'clock we can go out and still engage police and not get arrested. The last few nights we've been able to do it.
Sure, we were well into, 2 o'clock in the morning last night?
And we weren't taken down like this. We weren't arrested. And I think that what you're seeing here is twofold. I think you're seeing a message by police that enough is enough. There's a curfew now in place. You're going to observe this curfew. Mm-hmm. You can protest right up until 8 o'clock, but after that, you're going to get arrested if we catch you out. And then the second thing is to send a message that, look, we've played nice. We allowed you to go out and protest, but you broke the rules.
Right.
And you're not going to get away with it anymore. And so possibly, as the next few nights play out, you will see less and less of this.
Right. And like you said, Mark, earlier, about what's been happening in other major cities across the country. And it's clear that, Arizona, Phoenix, city of Scottsdale do not want to see anything like some of the violence that we've seen in other parts of the country. It's just been horrific. I mean, every time you open up your social media feed and you see, something else happening in another city, it's saddening. And
it's disheartening.
It's very disheartening.
And again, I will say, because I think that people will misinterpret our analysis of this, but yes, there is a problem in this country.
For sure.
There is a endemic, systemic problem of social injustice when it comes to people of color. But there are right ways to bring about that change, and we saw the right way in the 1960s with Dr. King, and there are wrong ways to do it. And when you loot and destroy private property, when you threaten to attack women randomly, whether that's real or not real, you don't, not only do you not accomplish what your goal is, but you actually hurt the cause.
You hurt the cause. Yes, you hurt the cause, you hurt the message. And we have seen some really beautiful, peaceful protests across the country. I saw a video today coming out of Denver, Colorado, of people lying down, on their
Very
back.
effective.
It was powerful. It was moving. And I think,
lawful.
And lawful. And I think if you'll hear most of the activists that have been talking, that's what they want to see.
Right.
Those images are just as powerful and they convey the message. And very few people condoning, some of this, violence, especially the violence, that pertains to people, when people are hurting other people in the process.
We can't live in a lawless society, but I don't think that there is anyone, and we're unfortunately, a lot of people would say fortunately, but we're not in a position to make change. What we are in a position is to be the voice for the voiceless at times, to raise the alarm, to raise the red flag, and to help these people get their message across.
Yeah, and hopefully, this will be the start of real change in the future.
Yes.
It is sad that we're seeing some of the things that we're seeing, but it's time
has come.
Right, and hopefully this will just be the catalyst to really start to change the system overall.
Right.
At the local level, at the federal level, and
Absolutely.
this can't all be for nothing.
And the time is now. I think that we've seen too much of this. And I think that now, and it's interesting that it's coming on the heels of the coronavirus pandemic, not only here in the U.S., but across the world. But we do need to change the conversation. We need to have a serious, ongoing, fruitful conversation about the problem of racism and social injustice in this country. And I think now might be the perfect time for that to happen, to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we'll be continuing to monitor the developments here in Phoenix. We don't know just quite yet if there are protests planned for the rest of this week. But again, that curfew will allow that to happen at least up until about 8 o'clock every single night. And hopefully, we don't see too much more scenes like this, like what we're seeing right now of people having to be arrested. This is video from a little bit earlier ago that you're seeing there.
About an hour ago.
About an hour.
7th Street and Roosevelt, right in the heart of downtown Phoenix. I will say that as this fourth night of protests went underway over George Floyd, earlier there were hundreds marching peacefully in the downtown area. The official protest ended about 7:30. There were still about 100 people in the streets at about 8 o'clock. And then at that point, they were officially in violation of the curfew. At that point, around 8 o'clock, we understand that an ATM was smashed on Central Avenue. At 8:19, police said to the group that was roving around Central Avenue in downtown Phoenix, look, you are an unlawful assembly, and you're in violation of the curfew. And then what you see here started to unfold. Police started moving in and making arrests. Several malls in the Valley were closed today, some for repairs, some out of just a sense of let's not have what happened at Scottsdale Fashion Square happen at our mall. We'll close out of a sense of precaution today. Scottsdale Fashion Square was closed, Chandler Mall was closed.
Right now on 12 News at 10, another night of unrest across the valley and the country. For the fourth night in a row, protesters have hit the streets demanding justice for the death of George Floyd, who was killed by a Minnesota police officer. But the calls for justice have quickly been overshadowed by the protesters that have turned violent and turned to looting and riots. But tonight, Valley police agencies have taken a stronger stance.
I want to give you a live look right now from Sky 12, and you can see some police presence down there. But for the most part, things seem to be quieting down right now. We will certainly keep our eyes on what is going on.
But around the country, things have been even more volatile and violent. So to prevent that from happening here in Arizona, Governor Doug Ducey issued a state of emergency earlier today and has ordered a curfew that began at 8 p.m. tonight, but it doesn't appear that people will be going home anytime soon.
Let's begin our team coverage tonight with Joe Dana. And Joe, you've been in Phoenix with protesters. You've seen some of the arrests tonight. You've been with the protesters since about 5 o'clock this afternoon. What is happening in the crowd right now?
This has been a tale of two protests. The first one that ended officially at 7:30 with upwards of 1,000 people through downtown Phoenix. It was peaceful. They seemed unified. They ended with a prayer. By 8 o'clock, 8:30 and 9, there were probably 300 to 400 people that were moving throughout central Phoenix area, downtown, north, dozens of blocks. That's when they clashed with police near the I-10. Police pushed them back from getting on the I-10 freeway. And then I want to show you this video. We had a couple of those protesters taken into custody by police at what was a busy intersection at the moment. Some scary moments there, as there were some bystanders around in the area as well. Police took them into custody, and a couple of hundred of these protesters continued throughout the neighborhood. They did damage to 2 different buildings. They smashed an ATM and one door to a restaurant, vandalized a couple of walls that we could see. And now we have here in one of these neighborhoods, several of these protesters ended up also being taken into custody by police, as of course their past the curfew, the official curfew of 8 o'clock. Above us, a helicopter continues to search for others who may be in the area. Police are hoping, though, this all starts to now dwindle down quietly, but we'll wait and see. Back to you, Mark.
Joe, thanks so much. Let's go now to Team 12's Bianca Bono, who joins us live from Central Phoenix. Bianca, what's the scene there?
Caribe, we are live right now at 7th Street and Fillmore, and it is very quiet where we are. I'll tell you what's happening right now, though. At the intersection across from me, 3 people are in handcuffs. It's unclear if they were out protesting or if they were just walking around downtown, but they're out past curfew. We've been seeing a lot of this over the past couple of hours. Since the clock struck 8 o'clock, everyone now that is out is in violation of this curfew. So what we started to see was the protesters earlier on moving north on 7th Street towards the 10 freeway. They stopped short of the freeway because of a large police presence that was there. Then that's when the officers started deploying tear gas and firing either rubber bullets or pepper balls. That's then what caused the protesters to run east in the direction where you saw Joe just a couple minutes ago. Then the protesters, according to police, were hiding in the dark areas of this quiet neighborhood. So police are still going up and down through the streets, trying to find the remaining protesters in the area and detain them and arrest them for being out past that 8 o'clock curfew. So again, right now, it's just very different compared to what we saw last night and on Friday night. At 10 o'clock when we were reporting to you live, it was chaos. Now it is quiet. So again, that curfew appears to be working, guys.
That's Team 12's Bianca Bono reporting from Central Phoenix for us. We'll continue to check in with her throughout the evening. Meanwhile, we want to go to Scottsdale, which was the scene of a very ugly situation last night. Scottsdale Fashion Square being looted and vandalized. Team 12's Mitch Carr continues our coverage from Scottsdale. Mitch, what's it like out there tonight?
Mark and Caribe, it is completely quiet out here tonight. In fact, the only sound that we are hearing right now, if you can look behind me, this is Scottsdale Quarter. You have a couple of guys that are getting up on ladders and putting boards over the windows. They're not repairing anything. It's a little bit like if you've ever lived on the East Coast and you got ready for a hurricane, they're putting up some storm shutters, so to speak. The thing about that is that they wouldn't be putting those up if they were expecting the threat to go away tomorrow or the next day. You have to believe that with those guys putting up wooden boards over windows, they're expecting more of a threat to come a little bit later. But as far as the Scottsdale police go, they're blocking off every entrance and exit here at Scottsdale Quarter, and it's been completely quiet since that curfew at 8 o'clock. It's just us and the police and those repairmen out here. The National Guard is a few blocks away. There are a couple of Humvees that are parked in a staging area, just ready in case something should happen. But if there was a thought that because Fashion Square Mall was hit last night, that perhaps Scottsdale Quarter or Kierland Commons across the street would be hit tonight, that has proven not to be true at this point. Everything is completely under control here in Scottsdale. We'll send it back to you.
All right, fingers crossed it'll stay quiet tonight, Mitch. Thanks. It's been another day of high tension and violence, not just here in Arizona, but also across the country. Curfews are in effect in other major cities from LA to New York as tens of thousands continue what has been a week of protests, many turning violent and destructive. Team 12's Jay Gray now with the latest.
Another night of angry crowds and chaos across the country. Tens of thousands gathering throughout the day from Los Angeles through New York. Most of the marches calm and controlled. Protesters demanding justice and change.
It's so moving, it's so inspiring to really exercise our First Amendment and do so in a peaceful, powerful way.
Honoring the memory of George Floyd, who died with a Minnesota police officer's knee across his neck.
How long can you be peaceful when your people are dying?
Still, in most every city, it seems, there are groups that aren't interested in keeping the peace. Buildings, cars, and police cruisers torched, windows shattered, businesses looted and trashed. Police literally pushing back. One officer pulling the mask off a protester and spraying mace. 2 patrolmen in Atlanta fired after pulling 2 college students from their car. And this tanker barreling into a crowd on this Minneapolis highway, somehow no one seriously injured. Police rushing in and arresting the driver.
I think the incident just underscores still the volatile situation we have out there.
A situation that has the country on edge. Jay Gray, NBC News, Minneapolis.
All right, that was where it all began. Jay, thank you. 13th Street in Van Buren now live Sky 12 pictures over some police activity. Phoenix police tonight have been pushing back against protesters who have stayed out after the 8 o'clock curfew kicked in. We've seen arrests all over the downtown area. We're not sure exactly what is happening, but you can see this very large, very visible police presence. Again, this is at 13th Street and Van Buren in the heart of the downtown area.
And again, tonight, Governor Doug Ducey has declared a state of emergency for all of Arizona and has issued a curfew that began at 8 p.m. and goes until 5 a.m. each morning. The curfew expires next Monday until further extended. Unless it is further extended, we will have more from our crews on the ground coming up a little bit later on in the show.
All right, turning our attention now to the weather. The hot temperatures proving to be a real fire danger. We've seen that out on the Ocotillo fire. Team 12 meteorologist Jen Wall joins us now with a look at the dangers these firefighters are facing.
Yeah, so the good news here is that conditions for firefighters will be improving overnight. Winds should start slowing down, especially after midnight. And then for Monday, tomorrow, we can expect temperatures to get to about 106 degrees across the deserts. Wind a little bit less than today at about 5 to 10 miles per hour. And relative humidity still very dry, but a slight improvement there. So we're looking at about 11 to 16% again for that relative humidity. And then looking ahead to our fire danger across the state, we're in that very high zone. There are a lot of restrictions going on as well, especially in those desert and forest areas. And looking ahead to temperatures over the next few days. Tomorrow, 106. We're well above average. Tuesday and Wednesday, 108 to 109. And coming up, we'll get a look at your full forecast because temperatures, again, are expected to crank up through the middle and end of the week. And guys, we are expected to get a little bit of relief.
All right, Jen, thank you. Right now, the Ocotillo fire is still burning north of Phoenix. More than 1,000 people have been evacuated by firefighters as they try to gain control. Team 12's Michael Dowdna spoke to some of those neighbors who barely got away with their lives.
And it can start very fast and spread very rapidly, and that's what we experienced yesterday.
A mountain on fire just outside of Cave Creek and outside of Bob Bose Bell's home.
I saw this billowing smoke going up.
Bob would go outside and see the flames jump over the road.
And the flames were 15 feet high. And I said, we gotta go.
Bob and his wife would then jump into separate cars before turning out of the driveway as visibility dropped to zero.
A total whiteout with smoke. And then flames started to come across the windshield. So I did what any American male would do, and I gunned it.
Bob made it through. But when he looked behind him, he noticed his wife's Kia was on fire.
And so I got out of the car, and I'm going, run for it, run for it.
His wife suffering burns, but thankfully alive. Their car is now melted, and unable to go back home, a community came to help.
It's just instinct to open up and to get all these people we know safe.
The Tumbleweed Motel, closed since mid-March because of the pandemic, opened their doors back up to give refugees fleeing the fire a place to stay for free.
To be able to do that for everybody, it's nothing.
A local Domino's delivered pizza to the 20 families staying at the motel. Nearby Harold's offering free breakfast, and for those displaced, it's a blessing after destruction.
You really find out what's really valuable in life. It ain't stuff, it's people like that.
And one more small miracle. Bob's house has survived thanks to some weed whacking, which kept the flames from his home. Now fire officials say that the evacuation orders will stay in place, at least for the time being.
Still to come, the twists and turns of a cult mom's life after her kids disappear. It keeps getting stranger. What Lori Vallow's friends are now admitting about the mom behind bars.
And the hot temps could cause havoc on your car. We're talking to a Valley mechanic about how to protect your car from the summer heat.
You're watching 12 News at 10.